Okay, so we're going to pick up where we ended on Tuesday. Last time we had just added this error message class, and and we're going to now add that to our form validator. So if we head up here, we have the error message class, right? And we're going to, in our set input valid, we're going to remove the class error message selector. Error message class. We want the class, not the selector. So, error message class. Okay, so now whenever an input is valid, we remove the error class off the input and remove the class on the error message that we added so that it was visible. And then we're also going to say error message element dot inner text equals a blank string. Okay, so now the text of that error message element will be a blank string. So let's see, let's just make sure. Okay. All right, now we're going to work on the set input invalid. Okay, so we're going to pretty much do the same thing, just the opposite. So I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to paste it down here, add some space here so we can see this a little bit better. Okay, and what we're going to do here is we're going to add this class, right? We're going to add this class, and then this text is going to be our element dot validation message, right? Is that what we decided it was? Validation message. Okay, so now we hit save. If we come up here and we type some words and we remove them, it doesn't work. Now why doesn't it work? Let's check. So we're checking to see if the input is valid, right? So let's just go ahead and console log here. It is invalid. Okay, and we'll console log here. It is valid. Okay. Let's open our console. I'm going to move the console down to the bottom so that I can continue working on here and not have it run over. Let's go here. I'm going to type some words. Now that should have ran, so let's make sure that this is being checked. So this is happening. Let's make sure that we are actually getting in here. Check. Okay. Refresh this. Aha! There's the issue. We need to go live. Form validation. Let's reopen here. Let's see, actually, it's back over here. Okay, so it works. We don't need these consoles anymore. We just weren't running a project yet. Okay, so if you remember last time, we made it so that the first name had to be 3 letters. So here is our validation error. So if we don't fill out form, oh, this one is missing an at. Okay, so maybe on the password we need to have something like needs to be 8 characters. Okay, so we can run into our index.html. You can say our password is min length 8, max length 32. Okay, you say, oh, it's gotta be 8. Okay, so, and again, like we talked about last time, you can have a regular expression here that tests and say the password has to have an uppercase, lowercase, a number, a number, and a special character, and has to be 8 characters. And so there's all sorts of things you can do so that the browser picks that up and runs those tests for you. But we're going to keep it a little bit more simple, as we're just learning how to do basic validation right now. Okay. Okay, so we have that set up, but I can still, if we go up here to our event listener and I console log submitted, I can still submit even when nothing's filled out, right? So let's make sure that we're filled out before we submit. So that's where this toggle button function comes in. Okay, so toggle button is going to say we're going to get all the elements. Okay, so we already have a selector for all the elements. Here's the input elements. Instead of const, I'm going to put that on this. Okay, and make it private. And same with the button element. I'm going to put it on this and make it private. Okay, this is up in our setup event listeners function, and that way I can get a hold of these in this function here. Okay, so we're going to say what do we call it? Input elements. Okay, this dot input elements, and did we make that an array? Yes, we did. Okay, so we're going to say dot sum, and we're going to check validity. Okay, so we're going to say if any of them are invalid. So actually we're going to move this into a different function. Okay, we're going to have a function, we'll put it underneath toggle button, that says has invalid inputs. Okay, I'm going to put this one here. So input dot validity dot valid, and we're actually going to say if it has some that pass this, which says that it's not valid, which will return a true if valid is false, right? And if sum gets anything back, then it's going to be true or false, right? So that's what the sum function does. You may have gone through that in one of the JS30 array cardio. If you haven't got to that one, then it's coming up. Okay, so we're just going to check to see, are there any inputs that are invalid? Okay, so we're going to return this. So we just want to return yes or no, true or false. Okay, and we're going to say if this dot has invalid inputs, and we're going to say this dot button is a button element dot disabled equals true. I think that works. Let's just make sure. Okay. Private field inputs must be declared in the enclosing class. Okay, so it's upset that I don't have these two fields already set up, so we're just going to go up above our constructor and set them up. So we're going to say input elements equals an array, and button element equals null. Should I just put them both to null for now? Okay, should be fine now. Let me see. Okay, now we're disabled. Probably want to run this toggle button on setup rather than on each input, so we need to run it here as well. So we're just going to run this dot toggle button immediately after setup, just to make sure that we don't have it enabled. Okay, so now we can't push this button. once we get, we need an else here, right? So else, and we're going to pull this here, and we're going to say false. So we're going to make it enabled. If it doesn't have any invalid inputs, then we can enable the button, and we can, so web heavy at C, okay, and that should have enabled. So let's see why it hasn't been enabled. These invalid inputs should return a button elements. So let's just console log disable and enable. Okay, so we start with disable, keeps disabling. Okay, we should be enabled at this point. So let's make sure that it has invalid inputs is in the right thing. Let's put this here. Let's say console log. Oh, you know what? We're not calling that function. Okay, so that was always true because it was a function, which is truthy. We weren't calling the function. When you call the function. Okay. And then, okay, once we're enabled, you can click here, submitted. Oh my god, 1Password. Thanks, 1Password. Delete this. We're disabled. We can no longer click that. Get our error messages, and there we have it. So the only other thing we might want to have is a public function to reset this form so that you're not looking at this form in an invalid way. So we could have a function called reset form, okay, and in this function we're going to call this dot toggle button, okay. We're also going to loop through our inputs and remove, actually I guess we can just call set input valid. No, we want to just, yes, yeah, we could toggle through this dot input elements dot for each, and then we get an input. We could say this dot set input valid and pass it no, that won't work because we gotta have the error message element. So we do for each input and then just pull this remove here, which is going to be on input instead of on element. Okay, and then we would also want to this dot, no, not this, yeah, this dot form element dot query selector. So we're going to go and get all of this dot error message selector. We're going to get all the selector or error messages, and then we're going to dot for each on that error element. Okay, and then in that error element we're going to run these things. Message element, just so that we don't have to rewrite some stuff. Okay, so that should now reset our form. So if we were to have a let's see if we had a method to do that. Let's say just set a timeout. Okay. And in the timeout, I'm going to wait 5 seconds from when the form loads. And then I'm going to say trial form validator initer reset form. Okay, we're going to come over here, it saves it, and start filling it out. Okay, now let's see if at the 5 seconds it resets it. Oh, and we also probably want it to remove all of the values here too. Value equals blank. And syntax error missing after. In the form validator 90. Oh, haha. This is now more than one thing. It needs a block. Okay. Oh, see it reset before I could finish filling it out. But you did see it reset, and these all got unfilled out and didn't have error messages. So maybe that's what I should do, is fill it just a little bit. So let's refresh. Yep. Okay, so the reset will just set our form back. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the timeout. That was just to show that's how it worked. And the form in here, we can get rid of this submitted. Okay, and then that's it. So now our form will be validated. To recap, we created a constructor, and in the constructor we set up all of the pieces coming off of our selectors and our form. We were expecting our selectors to be an object of classes and or selectors, just strings, and our form to be an actual form element. Then we have a public function called enable validation that sets event listeners an event listener for the form element and prevents default. Then we say setup event listeners, and in setup event listeners we loop through and get all of our input elements. We get our button element, and we set an event listener on all of our input elements, that whenever there's an input we check validity and we toggle the button. We also toggle the button right at the beginning, just so that we make sure that our button is toggled. So disabled when the button or when the form first comes up, so that you can't just submit a blank empty form. Okay, so check validity gets the error message for the current element, and it says if the element's valid, then set the styles and the error text accordingly. If it's not, then call this function, which sets accordingly. So adds in the input is invalid and adds the text, removes classes and removes the text if it's valid. We also have our toggle button function, which we talked about earlier. Okay, we just wrote that one tonight. And this one sets disabled true or false, whether or not any invalid inputs exist. If it has invalid inputs, it's based on the inputs elements array being looped through, checking to see if any of them have validity valid set to false. If they do, then it will return a true here. And then a reset form that toggles the button, removes all of the class items. Toggle button we should probably have lower in this list. Yeah. So toggle button because if you filled it out and then we toggled the button, then the button would be active. So we're gonna, if you filled it out and we unfill it out and we remove the class information, and then we also set this so that it's gone and remove the viewable class, and then we toggle the button to make sure that the button is toggled after the elements have had the values removed. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions on that, let me know, and hopefully everybody starts feeling better. Sorry that this was the method we had to do for tonight, but that's the validator, and that should help you get going